Hi, today we'll be discussing passed pawns when they're separated and disconnected. So in the previous video where we did have separated pawns, now we have enemy pawns to deal with. In this case, we have the pawns on g5 and h4, which will just contain with the maneuver king h3 and king g4. And just like we saw before, we just march one of these pawns all the way to the end, and the black king can't contain them both. For example, after a5, king b5, e5, and after king takes a5, e6, and the king is outside the square, and we were able to contain the black pawns. In this situation, it's a little bit different because our pawns aren't far enough. So after a4, then king b4, e5, king takes a4, e5, then the king is inside the square, so he'll just play king b5, and if king f5, then h3, and the pawn's queen at the same time. e6, h2, e7, queens, and this is a total draw, so that definitely won't work. In this situation, though, we can create something that, if you notice, if these pawns were not here, and we're able to contain these pawns by the maneuver king e3, king f2, king g3, and king h4, then one of these pawns will promote, like we saw in separated pawns video. So of course, we'll create one of that, and after c5, b takes e5, king e3, the maneuver starts. And now these pawns can be contained. If c4, then b6, and our pawns are first. c3, b7, c2, king d2, g3, b8 queens, and after this is a typical maneuver. One of the pawns is going to sacrifice himself so that this pawn queens will check, but that doesn't work at all because of c1 queens, g2, and then followed by queen a7 check, and now you have a fork with e7 and g1, and that prevents the pawn from queening. So that's the whole trick, is creating a pawn breakthrough. Now here we have a different situation where it's white to move, and something interesting to notice about the position is that the black king cannot move from this square, because if it does, if it goes somewhere else, it can't go here. But if it goes away, then this pawn is left unguarded and we just capture it. And then this pawn promotes, or it can be used as a decoy so that we can capture the pawn on f7 and g6. So black has to stay right here. The black king has to stay on d6. The problem is that if it was black to move, then he'll play f5. And if g3, then h5, and he creates a passed pawn by f4. So he has counterplay with that. We have to play to prevent the g5 maneuver, so that whole plan falls apart. So we'll play h4. Now we have 5, then we could actually play here just g3, and he has to move. He has no moves because g5, then h takes g5, or if f4, then g takes f4. So f5 doesn't work, and the black king can't move. The only other move is f6, and now we can play g4, trying to create a passed pawn by h5. But if f5, now g takes f5, g takes f5, and these pawns can be contained by the white king, like we've seen in the separated pawns video. But these pawns cannot be contained. They're too far apart. So we play king d3, and one of these pawns will promote. These pawns are two behind. For example, king d5, b6, c4, king c3, king f4, pawn to f4, b7, f3, and we queen. So it's all about making sure that your pawns are both outside the square of the black king, and you're inside of the squares above. It's very necessary to watch the separated pawns video for this to understand the material. now we have a more complex situation where it looks like we've contained this pawn and this pawn since we're in the square after king e3. But after king e3, he can play d4, followed by g3, g2, and queens. So we can't play king e3 yet. But we could promote one of the pawns. If we play to promote the h pawn, then his pawn will promote as well, and it'll promote first, so that's not good. We gotta contain this pawn. But one of the things you'll notice is that we can queen this pawn with check. So after, for example, f5, g3, f6, g2, f7, g1 queens, f8 queens, and we may just be able to trade this queen off and follow by promote this pawn. So right now this king has to go, let's see, he's not allowed to go there or there. If he goes to king c4, then let's see, where can he move? Well, it's unclear, but it's probably going to be a draw anyway. But we can actually just win this match outright instead of get into complications like that. So we can play to queen this and somehow contain this pawn and that pawn. And think about it for a minute. How can we possibly do that? Like if we play f5, he plays g3. We could play king e1. And at d4, f6, d3, g7, d2 check, king takes d2, g2, then pawn queens on time. So that totally works. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. f5, g3. Now we play king e1. If king e3, which is a mistake because of d4, followed by g2, g1. You want to stay as far back as possible. We talked about this in the unwieldy sword video. King e1. If g2 now, then king f2, d4, and we queen with check. f6, d3, f7, d2, and then we queen, and that's a win. So that's not going to work for him. He has to contain this pawn by playing a blockade, king c5. So king c5, and now we can push this pawn, h5, because he's going to set the blockade, but he's not in the square of the h pawn, not at all. So he cannot play to contain the h pawn. He has to push this g3, this pawn to g3. So after g3, we have to play king e1. Now d4, and now we threaten to promote our f pawn again with check. So he has to play king d6. It's the only way to get close into the square of the pawn. This is the only square he can move to. So, like if you play king d5 trying to avoid the check, then d7, and that's an obvious win. You can calculate it for yourself. Or we could just play g2, king f2, d3, queens. So king d6. Now we can play h6 again. And now after g2, king f2, d3. It takes, that's, let's see if that works. Can we take the pawn now? No, we can't take the pawn because king takes f2, d2, f7, queens, queen, and then king c6, and that's a draw. Even after something like h7, we could find some fork like queen c2, and then follow by taking the pawn. So that's not a good idea. In fact, we could just push to f7, threatening to promote with check. So he'll just play king e7, and now h7. And now, this is the coolest trick ever. d2. If we push a7 now, he plays d1, and it's a draw. But now we can sacrifice one of the pawns. After f8 queens, king takes f8, and now queen h8 check, followed by queen to d4. We capture both of the pawns, and that's a win. Finally, we have this situation where black actually threatens to promote with f5, a5, f4, a6, f3, a7, f2, queen, queen, queen e7, and now king to d5. So, but not king to d3 because of queen a6. So that's the threat, and we can actually just threaten to promote our pawn. The only move here to keep inside the square is king c5, but now king b2. And now at f5, then g takes f5, g4. Now we can threaten to promote check, f6, king d6, a6, g3, a7, g2, and might this actually be a draw? Well, actually no, because of the trick f7, queen g1, but then we have queen on f8, followed by queen on a8, and 2 queens is better than 1, right? So you can't play that. So that's a threat. So he tries to capture this pawn, but after king b5, king c3, f5, then king takes f5, he's out of the square of this pawn, so he can't capture the other pawn. So he wouldn't be able to capture this pawn. We place g4. Now we just capture this pawn. We're inside of its square, so we're able to win the game. And yeah, that's the examples I have for disconnect the pawns. If you like this video, give it a like. Feel free to donate. That's very much appreciated. The link is in the description. And next video, we'll be talking about the final topic in pawn races, where the pawns are actually blocked, but they're rook pawns. So I'll see you in the next one.